The next thing I'm going to do is create the lumber object. Now, just keeping in mind that there are three families that I want to create to make this: a lumber family, a plywood family, and a void family for cutting things. So, to make the plywood or make the lumber family, I'm going to go to New Family, and I'm going to find my generic model template, and open it up. Now, the first thing to do is to create the rigging for the family, the regulating lines for the family, how it's put together. So I'm going to create a reference plane. Now, remember, in the experiments earlier, I found that I need to place it kind of flat down in the drawing area, the long end of the stud or the piece of lumber in that direction, and I'm going to create the edges of the lumber that way, and I'm going to go to my front view and create one more reference plane like that. And then I'm going to label them with dimensions. So that, and that, and I put another one like this. Now, it's very important that I start with the middle here. Start with this middle. Dimension lines are actually, the starting point is important. That's the reference line that does not move. The second reference line that I click on moves when the dimension changes. So, and I'm going to create one more here. It's not what I want. The aligned dimension all the way across. I've got that one all the way across. Never mind. Now, this one's going to be labeled A. This is the width of the lumber. Width of the lumber, if it's a 1 by something, it's a it's 0.75 inches. If it's a 2 by something, it's 1.5 inches. And you know, because these have names in the real world, a 1 by 4, a 2 by 4, I'm going to make them types. That dimension is always that amount for that type. Like I said, if it's 1 by 4, it's a 0.75. If it's 2 by 4, it's 1.5. So it's type. And I'll close that. And I'm going to click this one and name it B. Nice imaginative name. And also, this is a type. This is for the 3.5, 3.5 inch for a 2 by 4, or a 5.5 inch for a 2 by 6. And I'll just say, and then this one I'm going to call offset, because this is for how the piece of lumber is placed. You know, I could place it by the center line, I could place it by the face, I could place it by some other element, but I'm going to call, but this is going to be an instance, because this is not an intrinsic aspect of a 2 by 4. This is how we use the 2 by 4, and we could use it differently every time. So that's an offset. Now, I'm going to test these to see if they're working the way I want them to work. Now, I'll make this 2 inches and this 4 inches. and this is 0, and let's see what happens. And yeah, it looks like it worked properly. If I make this 1 inch, let's see how the offset works now. And now it's centered on that center line, and we've got those dimensions the way they're supposed to be. So that's good. Now I'm going to go back to my reference level, and I will make another dimension, and guess what this one's called? This one's going to be called C. And this one is different because on the job site, a carpenter takes a 2x4 length of wood and takes his skill saw out and cuts it to the right length. And we never know what that length is going to be. It depends on the project, depends on how the carpenter is using it, depends on the design. And so when I create this parameter, call it C, it's going to be an instance. That means every one of the elements could be different. You know, they might not be different, they could be different. It just depends on the instance it's placed. Now all of these are type of parameter length, and they're all parameter type of family parameter. And they could be a type or an instance. So that word type is used over and over again, and that is confusing. You just have to get used to it. Type of parameter is really the type of the parameter value. So the value could be a length, in this case is a length parameter. So that means some distance. And I'll do that. Okay, now the next thing to do is I need to create the actual stud or the actual piece of lumber or the model of the lumber. And I'm going to go back to my front view to do that. I'm going to zoom in. You can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to create an extrusion. I'll use my rectangle to create the extrusion. And I make a rectangle, and as is the typical way with Revit, I do not bother drawing it on the lines. I'll put it on the lines later. And I click a checkbox, and I have my extrusion. Now I've got these extension, and I can use them and lock the edges to my reference planes, my regulating lines. So, I click on the arrow and I can drag it to where I want it to be, and I can lock it. Click on the arrow, drag it where I want to be, and lock it. And I'm going to go to my top view, and similarly, I'm going to click on this, drag it where I want to be, and lock it. And then I'm going to save this. Now I'm going to go into 3D and look at this. Looks like a piece of lumber. Nice. And there's a couple more things I could do. One, I'm going to test it. What if it's 4 inches by 6 inches? And what if I center it on, or I make it 8 feet long? And apply. and it seemed to work. What if I want it centered? Make that 2 inches and apply, and it moves over a little bit. And if I could look at it in the front view, and yes, indeed, it's centered. Everything worked the way it's supposed to. So that's great. The last thing to do here, so I need to make my types. So I could make a 1x4 type. And 1x4 types are always going to be 0.75 inches in that direction and 3.5 dimensions in B. And the length, we don't really care. The C, we don't really care. The offset, I want it centered. So that's 3/8 of an inch. And now it's centered, and apply, and it looks good. I'm going to do something real well. I could look at that in 3D. And it looks good. And then I could make a 2x4 type. Well, it's going to be 1.5 inches by 3.5. That's good. Apply that, and it got thicker the way I would expect. A 1x4 is twice as thick as a 2x4 is twice as thick as a 1x4. I can make another type for a 2x6. And that looks good. And I can make another type as a 2x8. And put in a new dimension for it. And another one for a 2x10. It's going to be 9.25. And see, it doesn't matter whether I use decimals or fractions. The last one I want is a 2x12. We don't use that very often. They're expensive. It can be hard to get, special order, but sometimes you just need a 2x12. Okay, and then go back and save this again and load it into my project, and let's see what we get. So I take a component here. How about it? Notice I can change the size, 1x4. I can go to a 2x8. I can place on face and place it on this roof here. I can rotate it upon placement. So from here, now let's place it and see if we can rotate it now. Place it here. I'm going to pick my plane. That may be the problem. Let's pick that object. Yeah, that looks more the way it's supposed to. And rotate it. There we go. Okay, so the problem was that my work plane was not correct for rotating it. So I have to define my working plane because rotation takes place on the working plane. And back and pick that now. And I can actually just say rotate them by 90 degrees. And I got it rotated the proper way. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to look at other ways that it performs. So if I go to my east view and I place this one, and it's got stretch lines, which is what I want. And I can click on the stretch and change the length. And this other one is a little more subtle. It looks like a stretch line, but it's not. Not actually a stretch line. See, it's actually the center line, the distance from the center line. And if I move that over, I'm getting whether it's centered on the placement line or not. I can't move it that far. So it performs the way I want it to. Now, in order to do a wall, there's a number of ways I could do that. Is that I'm looking at this view, I could place components on each of these, place them on a work plane. I can take this one and array it. Put in 1 foot 4 inches for 16-inch spacing, and click here. And arrays are very powerful, and then I can pick an arrayed object. And change the number of copies at will. So make 16 copies. And boom, I got 16 copies. And then I can move that around and place it wherever I want. So now I can do those really easily. Now one last thing to do is to this piece of lumber works for both plates and studs. So I can place it down here and place it horizontally and use the offset to and I could put the offset in precisely like this. So about 0.75 inches. And that centers it, and I can make it 1.5 inches and it should be precisely on that top there. And I can click on my plate and stretch it as far as I need it to go. So, so I can pretty much do the stud building that way, the stud model that way.